Godhead. Anyone who does not know that time is the same supreme personality is afraid of the time factor. Purport. But it's divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Everyone is afraid of the activities of time. But a devotee who knows that the time factor is another representation or manifestation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead has nothing to fear from the influence of time. The phrase Rupa Vidaspadam is by influence of time, so many forms are changed. For example, when a child is born, his form is small, but in the course of time, that form changes into a larger form, the body of a boy, and then the body of a young man. Similarly, everything is changed and transformed by the time factor, or by the indirect control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Usually, we do not see any difference between the body of the child and the body of the boy or young man, because we know that these changes are due to the action of the time factor. There is cause for fear, or there is cause for fear for a person who does not know how time acts. Well, okay. Yeah, when people are ignorant, obviously there is fearfulness. But if people are educated, they're not afraid. Okay, so text 38. Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the enjoyer of all sacrifices, is the fountain and the master of all masters. He enters everyone's heart. He is the support of everyone, and he causes every being to be annihilated by another. Report by Srila Prabhupada. Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is clearly described in this passage. He is the supreme enjoyer, and all others are working as his servants. As stated in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Harivilas 5.14. Ekale Ishwara Krishna. The only Supreme Lord is Vishnu. Ada Sabha Britya. All others are his servants. Lord Brahma, Lord Shiva, and other demigods are all servants. The same Vishnu enters everyone's heart as Paramatma, and he causes the annihilation of every being through another being. He causes the annihilation of every being through another being. Okay. Let's see what I mean by that. Verse number 39. No one is dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nor is anyone his enemy or friend. But he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroys those who have. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. A living entity is as eternal as the Supreme Lord, but due to his forgetfulness, he is put into this material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. Actually, this forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Vishnu is the cause of his destruction. Anyone who revives his consciousness of the original relationship in other words, relationship with Krishna, receives inspiration from the Lord. This does not mean that the Lord is someone's enemy and someone else's friend. He helps everyone who is not bewildered by the influence of material energy. No, I'm sorry. He helps everyone. One who is not bewildered by the influence of the material energy is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. It is said, therefore, Harivilas naiva shritim taranti. No one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death without the help of the Supreme Lord. It is therefore the duty of all living entities to take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. Text 40. Well, let's just take a look at this text 39 a little bit more. It says, no one is dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nor is anyone his enemy or friend, but he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroys those who have. Okay, well, we have a real incentive now to remember Krishna and to always glorify the Lord. And in the purport, it does say, forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality, is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. Well, many people forget God. They don't forget, how much money they have, but a lot of people forget Krishna. Forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. A living entity is as eternal as the Supreme Lord. But due to his forgetfulness, he is put into the material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. Actually, his forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Vishnu is the cause of his destruction. Anyone who revives his consciousness of the original relationship with Krishna, of course, receives inspiration from the Lord. This does not mean that the Lord is someone's enemy and someone else's friend. He helps everyone. One who is not bewildered by the influence of material energy is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. It is said, therefore, Harivilas naiva shritim taranti. No one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death without the help of the Supreme Lord. It is therefore the duty of all living entities to take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. Okay, well, here is a warning and a very positive statement. This forgetfulness of Vishnu or Krishna is the cause of death or repetition of birth and death. However, it's the duty of every living entity, of all living entities, to take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. Okay, so not everybody has knowledge of Vishnu or of God, and they're in a very bad situation. However, when we become serious about serving Lord Krishna, then we have a possibility of being saved from the repetition of birth and death. But obviously, we need the help of the Lord to do that. Therefore, the duty of all living entities is to take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. Well, this is a very major statement. And that's exactly what a devotee does. He takes shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu or Krishna, and then he can save himself from the cycle of birth and death. So how do you take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu? You engage in devotional service to the Lord. You come to the classes every day. You can also give the class, and you remember the Lord. You understand more and more about the Lord, and you engage in regulated devotional activities every day of your life. And that way, we actually perform our real duty. And what is our real duty in life? It's to take shelter at the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save ourselves from the cycle of birth and death. Okay, so how do you take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu? You glorify the Lord with choice verses, and you also remember the Lord, and you also engage in the devotional service of the Lord. At that point, you have taken shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus saved oneself from the cycle of birth and death. Now, how many people do that? Not many. They're so busy making money, spending money, eating lobsters. Lobsters are one of the worst things you could ever eat. You know. First of all, it looks horrible. A lobster looks horrible. But people think that it's a delicacy to eat a lobster. They go to Cape Cod in Massachusetts specifically to eat lobsters. And then they have this big aquarium, and they have all these lobsters in it. Right? So you pick the one that you want to eat, and then somebody takes it out, right, and puts it in boiling water to kill it. The lobster doesn't like that at all. And then they give it to the person to eat whole. They eat the whole lobster.
Yeah.
You know, with the intestine and the stool in the intestine. And some people tear apart the whole lobster, and sometimes they eat the intestine also with the stool in it.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever went to Cape Cod.
No, I have. My friend was talking about the exact same thing in Vancouver, actually, in Canada.
Yeah.
So there are some kind of restaurants, same like you are describing. They give you the live lobsters to choose from, and then you can choose, pick it up, whatever you want, and they cook it for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They put the lobster in boiling water.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, the lobster doesn't like that, you know.
No one likes it.
But it doesn't survive, though, you know. It's not made to be in boiling water, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then they give it to you to eat and whole. They give you the whole lobster, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they'll give parts of the lobster, but otherwise, other places they give the whole lobster. And it looks horrible. You ever see a lobster? It doesn't look nice.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like something from outer space.
So Maharaj, I have a question here. Like, but he in the translation, it says that, but he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him, and destroys those who have. So the other part I understand, he destroys. So inspiration means like he gives to do more inspiration for doing more devotional service. What kind of? Can you elaborate on this?
Well, but he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroys who have. Well, you can understand. If you forget Krishna, then you're going to ruin your life. If you remember Krishna, that way you'll be engaged in devotional service the rest of your life. That's all it means. It means that.
So he inspires more and more. Krishna inspires more and more to do more and more and more devotional service.
Yeah, look, I mean, right now it's 6:50 in the morning. Right? So we're up and we're hearing about Krishna.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what it means, that he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him. So we're remembering Krishna right now. And we're learning more and more about Krishna every day. No one is dear to the Supreme Personality Godhead, and no one is an enemy or a friend. But he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroy those who have. So there are millions of people, that are waking up now, or maybe later on, and they're just going about, their normal schedule, which is basically drinking some coffee, going to work, and doing mundane things without any thoughts about God, without any thoughts about Krishna. And I'll tell you, I don't have time. I'm busy, and then they get in their car and they're driving all over the place early in the morning to get to work on time. And then there's traffic blockages and things like that. And then they get to work. Right away, they have to drink some coffee to wake up. Everybody has their, coffee. And they go to work with the coffee in their hand. That's coffee, of course, is a type of intoxication. And they, that's what they do every day. Or the ones that are retired that go to, a shop where they can sit down and drink coffee. That's part of their, the retired people. Many times they'll go to what's the name of the company?
Starbucks?
Yes, Starbucks. And they'll pay, $10 to drink some coffee. You can stay at home and it might only cost you $1, right? But they become accustomed to doing that.
They do socialize more, I think.
Well, yeah. But we want to socialize with people. They want to socialize with coffee and other coffee junkies.
So Maharaj, like one other question. Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says he is the well-wisher of everyone. This
and here it says, something different here.
He gives inspiration.
I mean, in the sense, like
those who have not forgotten him and destroy those who have.
Yes.
So how does he destroy those who have forgotten him? Well, all you have to do is go to a hospital and you see how he's destroyed people who have forgotten him.
No, but this seems to give a sense that he is
prejudiced.
Not, yes, maybe, but it's more like he's indifferent and he doesn't care about it. But in the way Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Suhridam Sarva Bhutanam. He is the well-wisher of everybody. So this seems to give the perception that they're all not.
Hey, you're being invaded here.
The devotee invasion.
Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We're talking about lobsters.
A huge audience for lobsters. Huh?
Some of them have attended Red Lobster.
Okay, so what is your question?
Yeah, just the verse seems to give a perception that the Lord is not caring. Those who are not remembering Him, but the way that verse in Bhagavad Gita indicates that because it is true, because the Lord is maintaining those that forget Him also. So
I mean, you're missing one point though. It says forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality, is the cause of repeated birth and death. So he's not really killing anyone. But he's keeping them in the cycle of birth and death because they forget him. But if you remember Krishna, then he liberates you from the cycle of birth and death. But both ways you're going to be alive. In other words, you're never destroyed. There's no such thing that you're wiped out from existence. Okay? That means he's merciful. He's giving you a chance to become liberated from a cycle of birth and death if you want to. And if you don't want to, then he puts you in different species and you come back again to the human form of life. Again, you have a chance. But you're never annihilated, let's put it like that.
Mhm.
The soul is eternal. You might change bodies, but you cannot be annihilated. So that's why he said, but he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroy those who have. But when it says destroy, it just means that they change their body and they can go back into the realm of animals or even less than that. But you never really are destroyed completely. Although it says here, and destroys those who have forgotten him. But that means that the present body as a human being may be destroyed, but you'll take birth again in another form, but not necessarily a human form. So that's why it says here, forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. A living entity is as eternal as the Supreme Lord. So that means you're never going to be wiped out, erased, dead completely. But due to his forgetfulness, he is put into this material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. Actually, his forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Krishna is the cause of his destruction. Anyone who revives his consciousness of the original relationship receives inspiration from the Lord. This does not mean that the Lord is someone's enemy and someone else's friend. He helps everyone. One who is not bewildered by the influence of material energy is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. It is said, therefore, Harim Vina Naiva Shrutim Taranti. No one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death without the help of the Supreme Lord. It is therefore the duty of all living entities to take shelter of the lotus feet of Krishna and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. Well, cycle of birth and death means that you're never really destroyed. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a cycle. It wouldn't be a cycle. But you might not have a human form in the next birth. But it's cyclic. In other words, you're never going to really be erased completely from existence. But you can go through many, many different births and deaths.
So Maharaj, so
But
rebirth.
there are idiots that go, well, what's wrong with becoming an animal?
Lot of them.
Huh?
Lot of them.
Yeah, you see that. You know, they don't really realize how horrible it is. Go ahead.
So Maharaj,
Imagine
What's up?
becoming a lobster. Yes.
so for the after death, you are saying it may not be the human birth. So it is possible to get again human birth.
Well, yeah, if once in your life you got some prasadam
Mm-hmm.
by the mercy of a devotee, or you did some devotional service by accident or whatever, you'll have a chance of having a human body in the next life.
Okay. Yeah.
So in a way, devotees are the source of population increase. I'm just
Well, devotees are helping people be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Right? So, but you have an eternal soul, so you're never going to be erased. Right? But if you go back to Vaikuntha, then you have eternal life. And if you stand in the material world, you'll be going through this process of birth, death, old age, and disease all the time. Right? And not always in the same body, in different bodies.
Mm-hmm.
So the best thing is to become a devotee and go back to the spiritual world, to Vaikuntha, where we have eternal life. That, of course, is the purpose of the human being. But people like Jeff Bezos and others, they want eternal life for sense gratification. And people like Srila Prabhupada, they want eternal life for engaging in Krishna consciousness. So Bezos is an idiot. Prabhupada is a pure devotee. So instead of following all these idiots, it's better to follow Srila Prabhupada. But the main point here is it says, it says, a living entity is as eternal as the Supreme Lord. Okay, that's a major statement. Every one of us are as eternal as the Supreme Lord. In other words, we can never be erased from existence. But due to his forgetfulness, he is put into this material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. That means that he's not destroyed because he's thinking. After the body is destroyed, he's still thinking. So you're never really destroyed. But you can go from one body to another. Actually, this forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Vishnu is the cause of his destruction. Does that mean that you're annihilated completely? No. Otherwise, right before that statement, says that but due to his forgetfulness, he is put into material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. Actually, this forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Vishnu is the cause of his destruction. Anyone who revives his consciousness of the original relationship receives inspiration from the Lord. This does not mean that the Lord is someone's enemy or someone else's friend. He helps everyone. One who is not bewildered by the influence of material energy is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. It is said, therefore, Harim Vina Naiva Shutim Taranti. No one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death without the help of the Supreme Lord. So, no one really is destroyed because it says that there's a repetition of birth and death. But the body that you have is going to be destroyed if you're not Krishna consciousness. But you'll get another body, and the cycle keeps going on until you make the decision to become a devotee, and then you'll get an eternal body. So there's no more change of body at that point. It is therefore the duty of all living entities to take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. So, when you're in the cycle of birth and death, you get a body that is subject to getting sick and dying. But if you get, and it's not always a human body, but if you have a human body, that right there is a great blessing. Because it's only in the human body that you can understand your relationship with Krishna. And if you use the human body correctly to understand your relationship with Krishna, then you get a spiritual body that can never die, and you have eternal life. But you have eternal life, and either way you have eternal life. But you have eternal life in the spiritual world where there's no more cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. But if you don't engage in devotional service in the material world, you get a body, but it's always changing. And you're always in the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. And there's no guarantee that you'll be a human being in every birth. That's why there's 8,400,000 species of life or living beings. You can go through all those different species over and over again by adamantly avoiding Krishna consciousness. So, to get free from that cycle of birth and death, if you're fortunate enough to meet a genuine devotee or devotees and take up Krishna consciousness, then you can eventually become eligible to go back to the spiritual world, where there's no more cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. You always have a transcendental body engaged in a wonderful pastimes with the Lord. So everyone is striving for good times, happiness, love, like that. But they only have, little bit of that. And most of the time they're working hard and they're frustrated or they're angry or they're fighting or they're, sleeping, whatever. But when the devotee becomes conscious, Krishna conscious, then it is no longer, let's say, a victim of self-victimizing themselves. They now begin the devotional service, and more they become enlightened, just like every day people are hearing lectures, and they become enlightened in Krishna consciousness. And if they're able to remember Krishna at the moment of death, they go back to the spiritual world, where they have an eternal body, no more change of bodies. And like you're living right now, every one of us is living right now with a body, but we're not this body, it's always changing. But in the spiritual world, you get a body that is not changing anymore. And it looks very much like Krishna. All the liberated souls in the spiritual world look like Krishna. It depends on their particular, let's say, desire. either they can look like have 4 arms like Lord Vishnu, or they can have 2 arms like Krishna. Either way, you have an eternal body, and there's no more cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. So that means there's a lot of fun. There's no more material suffering. But that doesn't mean that you are like a zombie. You're active, you're conscious, and everything is expanding, getting better and better. You finally, at a certain point, you're saying, "Oh well, I've reached the the highest level." But no, as soon as you think that, then it increases. So you're never bored in the spiritual world. There's always something new, and everything is expanding. Whereas in the material world, everything is deteriorating. Right from birth, you begin to deteriorate. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. In Vrindavan, the gopis and everybody, they don't realize or they don't have the feeling that Krishna is God. Because if they think Krishna is God or they believe Krishna is God, they cannot have a relationship with him the way they had.
You can't have that intimate relationship.
So in Golok Vrindavan also, you are aware of Krishna, but you don't think he is God, so that you can have an intimate relationship with him in Golok Vrindavan, or is it different, Maharaj?
Yes, you're not conscious that he's the supreme personality. Otherwise, you couldn't, play leapfrog with him, right? You couldn't, rest your head on his lap and be like intimate like that. You have to forget that he's the supreme personality Godhead, but you love him. That's the point. And Krishna reciprocates in that loving relationship. But if you forget Krishna, then you're in big trouble, because you become attracted to material things, and you spend your whole life, or waste your whole life, just chasing after material things. Like Jeff Bezos, today in the news, he bought this very, very, very high-tech airplane. Cost millions and millions of dollars. So there he is, one of the richest people in the world, and he's always surrounding himself with all these very, let's say, high-tech instruments, airplanes and rockets and things like that. What does that mean exactly? Well, it means that, his mind is involved with Krishna? No. It's involved with giving himself more and more pleasuring himself. Now, we get our pleasure by hearing about Krishna and chanting Hare Krishna and dancing and so forth. He gets his pleasure by making a lot of money and buying more and more airplanes and helicopters and all these different gadgets in his life, right? And that requires a lot of maintenance. But of course, he's very rich, so he hires people to maintain all the different things that he has. And he's enjoying life, so-called enjoyment. But he has not been able to stop the cycle of birth and death. Now, did the devotees stop the cycle of birth and death? Well, ostensibly, it looks like, Jeff Bezos gets old and dies, and devotees get old and die. But the difference is he'll see Yamaraj when he dies, and the devotees see Krishna. And when they die, and they go and they have eternal life in the spiritual world. And Jeff Bezos will go back to being maybe a cockroach or a lobster or something, and then wait to get back again to human form of life and have another chance to liberate himself. So, therefore, you have to understand that there are different paths people decide to take in life. And he's taking the path of self-gratification. The devotee, they become a genuine devotee, they take the path of self-surrender to Krishna. There's a big difference. So, and Krishna's guaranteeing you become my devotee, and you'll be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. There's no guarantee like that for Jeff Bezos, who doesn't have, is not really interested so much in Krishna as a devotee is. He's more interested in his sense gratification. So that means he's going to keep going through the cycle of birth and death. Going up and down in the cycle of birth and death. However, the devotee becomes free from the cycle of birth and death. So we should be working to have our last birth and death, and go back to the spiritual world, whereas there is no birth and death. There's eternal life. Now, people like Jeff Bezos, they're trying to make the material body eternal. They're trying to find different strategies or different medicines or different types of ways of living eternally in the material body. That, of course, is impossible. So when a person becomes convinced that they can change the laws of material nature, they're in complete illusion. But if you have a lot of money, like Jeff Bezos or other very, very rich people, they're always trying to find means of making the body immortal, which is not possible. You're never going to live more in this material body than 100 years or 110 years. And the body is going to get old, and eventually you can't live in that body anymore. It becomes completely decrepit. So here we have the attempt by people who are very rich to find some way to live in this body as long as they can. Right? And so they waste their time on different strategies to increase the duration of life. But actually, you're wasting your time. Normally, the human body can live to be about maximum like 100 years old, and sometimes 110, sometimes maybe 120. But by the time you get to 100 or 110, the body is very old and is full of, it's very difficult to maintain it. So people like Bezos and others who are very rich, they take up different ways of maintaining the youthfulness of the material body. But eventually, everyone is going to get old, get sick, and die. So why try and make your body young artificially? It's never going to be young artificially. You can make it look young. That's possible with plastic surgery and all other things. But you're going to get old, and we're all going to get old. You're going to get sick, and we're going to die. But what is different between a devotee who gets old and eventually gets sick and dies, and a karmi who's old and gets sick and dies? The devotee is remembering Krishna at the moment of death, and they go back to the spiritual world with an eternal body. And the other ones are seeing Yamaraj and staying in the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. Now, is this a fact? That's the point. Do we actually believe this? That we can have an eternal body and go back to the spiritual world? Or we can be a millionaire and try and find a way to make the body, the temporary body, immortal. Well, no, the temporary body is never going to be immortal. It's going to get old, sick, and die, no matter what you do. That's the law of material nature. So the devotee, rather than trying to make the body immortal, he engages in devotional service to have to eventually get a spiritual body and go back to the spiritual world, engaged always in the devotional service of the Lord. There's activity in the spiritual world, just like there's activity in the material world. But in the spiritual world, there's eternal activity in the spiritual body. And in the material world, there's temporary activity in the material body. So we should aim for immortality through devotional service, not aim for immortality through medicines and working out at the gym and things like that. Even people who work out in the gym every day, they also get old, sick, and die. And a person that never goes to the gym, they also get old, sick, and die. But a devotee who is using time for engaging in devotional service will attain eternal life. Now, we want eternal life in the spiritual world, not eternal birth and death in the material world. You can never be annihilated. Everybody has an eternal soul. But you can be in the cycle of birth and death eternally by avoiding Krishna consciousness. Or you can go back to the spiritual world eternally in your eternal spiritual body and no more birth, death, old age, and disease. So we have to make a decision in life. And it's all based on whether we have faith in the statements of the Shastra or not faith in statements of the Shastra. Everybody has faith in somebody or something. So the materialists, they have faith in materialistic strategies. And a devotee has faith in spiritual life. So everybody has some faith, right? If you had no faith in anything, then you wouldn't do anything. So obviously, people like Jeff Bezos, they have faith that they can extend the lifespan by different strategies that they're coming up with. So if they can have airplanes and rockets and things like that, then they think, well, we can also extend the lifespan by different strategies, right? And technology. But the devotee doesn't have to think in that way. The devotee knows that if he becomes engaged in devotional service, Krishna is going to protect him. But the devotee is not disturbed by the fact that there's old age and disease and death, because he knows that he has an eternal soul. On the other hand, the materialist is trying to make the body eternal, and that is impossible. But they try to do it by different strategies, by taking different types of medicines or exercise or this thing or that thing. But they're never going to get past 100 years or 120 years. They're going to die. There's no doubt about it. Everybody is. But what happens next is the difference between the devotee and the materialist. What happens next for the materialist? They're going to take birth again. And without knowing what their next body is going to be. In the case of the devotee, he'll take birth again, but as an eternal associate of Krishna somewhere in the spiritual world. So where the body is not going to change anymore. the spiritual, but they're going to get a spiritual body. So these are things that, you read, you hear about it, and you have to decide which narrative is actually the truth. So in the case of Krishna, he never gets old. He's always young. He's not subject to the cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. And therefore, because there is someone like Krishna, then Krishna is inviting you. You can always be like me if you follow my instructions. So that other people, they say, no, I want to do it on my own. I don't want to be religious. I want to be technologically elevated. That is a hopeless desire. You cannot become eternal through technology. Technology is a material thing, so you cannot attain eternal life through technology, because material things are all destined to get used and disappear in time. So these are decisions that we have to make. If someone is always promising you a eternal life by doing exercises and taking supplements and things like that, that is a false narrative. And even though they look very handsome, they look very rich, they look very popular, they look very opulent, but they are getting old, they're going to get sick, they're going to die. No matter how many supplements they take, no matter whatever strategy they have to make the body look young, like plastic surgery or whatever. Like, for example, you have all these movie stars that have beautiful teeth, and they've spent hundreds, sometimes millions of dollars having very beautiful teeth. So when they die, if you exhume them, take them out of their deaths, out of their
Casket?
yeah, what?
Casket?
Yeah, you have to take them out of their casket. You'll see they have beautiful teeth, right? But the rest of the body is decrepit. They have teeth that'll be immortal. That's the only part of their body that's going to be immortal. But we should not be bewildered by all these movie stars and all these big big people who are trying to become immortal physically, become immortal spiritually, but not physically. So we shouldn't be cheated by them. We should actually believe what Krishna says. So what does he say? In this verse, it's very clear. He says, but he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroy those who have. Okay, so that's enough to inspire us. Forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Vishnu, the Supreme Persona Godhead, is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. A living entity is as eternal as the Supreme Lord, but due to his forgetfulness, he is put into this material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. Actually, this forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Krishna is the cause of his destruction. That doesn't mean that it ends your existence. It just means that you're not going to get a spiritual body. You're going to always be stuck in material bodies. Your soul is eternal, but by being attached to material nature, you're going to change material bodies. And there's 8,400,000 species. They can go up and down in that cycle of birth and death, having all these different types of bodies. But when you get the spiritual body, there's no more up and down. There's no more changing bodies. Now you have the eternal body in the spiritual world. So here it says, forgetfulness of his relationship with Lord Krishna is the cause of his destruction. Anyone who revives his consciousness of the original relationship, that means that all of us were originally with Krishna, receives inspiration from the Lord. This does not mean that the Lord is someone's enemy and someone else's friend. He helps everyone. One who is not bewildered by the influence of material nature is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. It is said, therefore, Harim Vina Naiva Sritim Taranti. No one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death without the help of the Supreme Lord. So when it says that he helps everyone, one who is not bewildered by the influence of material energy is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. Well, their ability to have an eternal body is destroyed, or is stopped from having an eternal body. But they're always going to have a body, one way or other, in the cycle of birth and death. So therefore, no one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death. That means that you're never going to be annihilated, but you will go through the process of birth and death over and over again. Without the help of the Supreme Lord, it is therefore the duty of all the devotees to take shelter from the lotus feet of Krishna and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death. So we're always going to remain in the cycle of birth and death by avoiding Krishna consciousness. But if we become Krishna conscious, then we'll be freed from the cycle of birth and death and have eternal life in the spiritual world. Okay. You're never going to be annihilated. You're always going to be a living being, but you're going to change bodies, whereas you get an eternal body by becoming a devotee and engaged in eternal pastimes with Krishna.
Krishna Maharaj.
Yeah.
Question, Maharaj. You mentioned two parts. One is the ones who are trying to get an eternal body by following Krishna's instructions and go back to the spiritual world. Another is the ones who are trying to retain this physical body forever using technological advances. There is a third kind also, Maharaj, right? Who want to get liberation but using non-bona fide spiritual practices. They want liberation. These are the ones who want to merge with the Brahman. Like for them, do they have a body? Because in first and second, you always have a body. You either have a material body or a spiritual body. For the ones who want to get liberated and merge with Brahman, do they have a body?
Well, they're like ghosts. They have a ghost-like existence where you have very strong material desires, but by having a ghost body, you can't satisfy them. So they're in complete anxiety and complete, let's say, frustration. Ghosts exist, but they don't have bodies. So, but they have material desires for sense gratification. So it's a type of suffering where you have material desires, but no way of satisfying them because you're a ghost. Right? You don't have a material body. You have a ghost-like body. What is a ghost? It's someone is living. You're still a living entity, but you're full of material desires, but you can't satisfy them because you don't have a material body. You have a ghost body, which is a subtle body, right? It's just like, someone who loses their limbs, they're still alive though, but they can't run, because they don't have their limbs anymore. But they're still alive, but they can't walk, they can't do so many things, because they don't have legs and arms anymore. So it's like being a ghost. The ghost has a body, but it's a subtle body, and it cannot engage in gross sense gratification. They have the desires for gross sense gratification, but they don't have a body that's made for sense gratification. So they're just suffering in a state of limbo, in a state of, let's say, a type of hellish existence where they have these strong material desires, but not a body that's able to engage in material desires or satisfy material desires. Yeah.
All right, but if the third category, the ones they want liberation. If they want liberation, they would have given up a lot of material desires already. So in a way, they're giving up material desires. So would they still have material desire when they are in the Brahman?
Well, let's put it like this. The only place where there's no devotional service is merging into the Brahmacharya. There's no devotional service in Brahmacharya. So for a devotee, that's hell. But for the Mayavadis, they think that's heaven. Right? But and you cannot stay in that position eternally. So they'll eventually fall down and get back where they started from. So the devotee is a realist. The Mayavadi is let's say, is desiring things that are impossible to maintain. They might attain it for a certain period of time, but then they're going to fall down. They cannot maintain it eternally. So whenever we choose, we're trying to choose a path for our life. If we choose the life of a Mayavadi, it is a path that is not going to satisfy us completely. So therefore, we're going to fall down from that position. If we choose the life of a devotee, we'll never fall down. Why? Because it's always increasing in love and devotion. So we're never going to be bored. If we take the life of a Mayavadi, eventually they get bored and they fall down. Why? Like, for example, if you get into a rocket and you go out into space and you miss landing on the moon or landing on Mars, and now you're just floating in space, right? Well, you miss the purpose of life then, because the rocket is going out in space, and space is gigantic, it's huge. You see, so you have to take shelter in a planet, and then you can enjoy life. But if you're just floating in space, you're not going to be able to enjoy life. So that's what happens to the Mayavadis. They end up in a space where they are just floating, but never have any shelter in a planet. When the astronauts, they go out into space, well, their hope is that they're going to come back to the planet that they started from, but they just just keep going in space. Well, you're in nowhere. You're going to be completely frustrated, and you're going to die. So we always have to have a place where we naturally feel comfortable and we can practice Krishna consciousness. That is not floating in space. That is being on the Earth planet and practicing Krishna consciousness. Why do people want to go to Mars? It's crazy. What's a human being, that's living on the earth with an earth body? What is he going to do on Mars? He's not going to be able to live normally, and eventually he's going to die there without any way of coming back to the earth. Everybody trying to go to the moon or Mars is hoping also that they can come back to the earth. So therefore, why go in the first place? Why even desire to go in the first place? You can't live on Mars. You can't live on the moon. Our body is not made for that. So therefore, instead of spending billions of dollars trying to go to the moon, they should use that money to develop Krishna consciousness on the earth and help many people go back to the spiritual world. So you see how people do things that are impossible to achieve. They're not going to achieve immortal life on the moon. We don't have a body that can live on the moon. Therefore, you have to put on the moon clothes and things like that help you for a little while to stay on the moon. But it is we're not made for to live on the moon. We're not going to be able to make colonies on the moon or Mars. That's all nonsense. That will never happen. Because we're not made, our body is not made to live there. Just like our body is not made to be a fish. Right? Fish have a body that can live in the water all the time. We don't have a body that can live in the water all the time. And we don't have a body that can live on Mars or the moon. So why even attempt going there? It's crazy. Rather, instead of wasting all that money and time and energy, we should use all that time and energy in Krishna conscious activities and helping people go back to the spiritual world. Helping them going to the moon is not going to solve the problem of birth and death. But going back to the spiritual world, you solve the problem of birth and death, which is the real problem of everyone in this existence. So why choose a path that is going to lead you to nothing, to something that is not tangible, but something really tangible is being liberated from the cycle of birth and death and going back to the spiritual world where we came from originally. If we did not come originally from the spiritual world, there would not be a question of going to the spiritual world. But we all have come from the spiritual world. We all have come from Krishna originally. Therefore, we have the right to go back to Krishna in the spiritual world and have eternal life. You're not going to have eternal life on the moon. You're not even going to be able to live on the moon. It's impossible. Our body is not made for that. So all this moon exploration, going to Mars and all that, it's all a waste of money and a waste of time. And it's not going to help us advance in any way. If anything, it's going to help us to die earlier. So sometimes they ask for people to volunteer to go to the moon, right? And they get a lot of people that volunteer. But then they have to go through all the training, which is years of training to get into a rocket ship and fly to the moon. But our body is not made to live in the moon atmosphere. The moon is a place where it's much more elevated than the Earth planet. But people have subtle bodies on the moon. So you go there with a gross body, you're not going to be able to survive. Okay, so that's why here it says that forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Krishna, the Supreme Person of Godhead, is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. Okay, that's enough. We don't have to read anything else. If you want to have a real life, then you should develop your relationship with Lord Vishnu or Krishna, and you'll be free gradually from cycle of birth and death that solves the problem of human life, of human beings. But due to forgetfulness, he is put into this material nature and transmigrates from one body to another. And when the body is destroyed, he thinks that he is also destroyed. Why put ourselves in that situation? So it's saying here that that is our situation right now. But we can get free of that by practicing Krishna consciousness. But forgetfulness of one's relationship with Lord Vishnu is the cause of one's repeated birth and death. So if we just understand these 2 or 3 lines of this purport, it gives us the real purpose of life, that is to always remember Krishna, not forget Krishna, and always be in a relationship with Krishna and engaged in devotional service. Then we're free from the repeated cycle of birth and death. Haribol, all glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. You see, this is real literature. 2 or 3 lines. Prabhupada explains how you can have eternal life. You don't need, big books like this with so much information, information overload. But no, you just read 2 or 3 lines of the Bhagavad Gita. Gives you the key to eternal life. So what happens in the material world? Well, we're in the material world because we forgot Krishna. We forgot our relationship with Krishna. What is Krishna consciousness? It's teaching us to remember our original relationship with Krishna. And then we're freed from the repeated cycle of birth and death. Very simple. Even a little child can understand it. But most people never understand this. They read it, it doesn't make sense to them. Hare Krishna. All glories to
Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Yeah, I think specifically I asked what body will they have while they're in the Brahman realization. This is from ChatGPT Vedabase. When a soul merges into the impersonal Brahman, it is in a state of spiritual oneness without distinct material or spiritual body.
That means you have no body.
Yeah. And this condition is described as actually bodiless or without individuality, because the soul's individual identity becomes dormant.
You become a ghost, basically. Ghosts don't have.
It's like a suspended state in a way. And then it's an undifferentiated spiritual effulgence of the Brahman. And Srila Prabhupada explains in his purports that the soul in this state experiences neither material suffering nor the transcendental bliss of devotional service. So it's a
They're in limbo.
limbo state, actually. Yeah.
So they're-
Deep sleep state.
Yeah.
they cancelled.
Yeah. The soul is described as a particle of spiritual energy, and in the Brahman effulgence, it does not possess an individual form. However, this is an unnatural and incomplete state for the soul.
Unnatural.
Yeah, because its intrinsic nature is to have an active personal relationship with Krishna. Since the soul is by nature active and blissful, this formless state eventually leads to dissatisfaction, prompting the soul to return to the material world to seek activity. Only by progressing to devotional service, Bhakti Yoga, does the soul regain its eternal spiritual form, Swarupa, suitable for serving Krishna in the spiritual realm.
There you are.
They start all over again.
Yeah.
But you don't want to be on the merry-go-round. Merry-go-round just keeps going round and round and round. So you jump off the merry-go-round and go back to Godhead. Yeah. Everything is cyclic in the material world. But in the spiritual world, everything is eternal, not cyclic. It's eternal. In the material world, everything is cyclic. There's all kinds of different cycles: the water cycle, this cycle, that cycle. In the spiritual world, there's eternity. There's no cyclic, let's say, existence. You don't start out as a little baby, and then you become a teenager, then you become a man, then you become an old man, then you become dead. That's cyclic. In the spiritual world, you have eternal life. Not going through different changes.
Which is a verse. I know in the Gita we use Brahma Bhuvan Lokara.
Hmm.
It means only to the realm of material world, but Brahma Jyoti is beyond the material world.
Yeah,
Is
even-
a verse that can share with us.
What happens when
Uh,
in the Brahman state?
Brahma Jyoti.
So, Prabhupada, I think it's probably in the same verse in the purport. Prabhupada explains
Mm.
that that is obviously for the 14 planetary systems,
Yeah.
the material. But even in the Brahman realization,
Yeah.
you are in a temporary, it's better than the material world state, but it's still a suspended state of, where you are no longer in the misery of the material world, but you're not experiencing the full bliss, because it's like the satisfaction of not having the pain, but it's not the real bliss. So as a result, after some time, that state becomes dissatisfying, because you're like, now there's no more activity, and you're like, okay, you don't have the previous pain, but you forget the, only when it's like the example Prabhupada gives is, or somebody gives is like tight shoe. Right now, we're in the material world, you have a tight shoe. So it is painful. As soon as you take it out, it feels like liberating. But then you actually want a shoe to be able to walk around, the shoe that fits you. So that's what is spiritual world is like. The shoe that fits you is like the devotional service. Whereas right now it's like, you just get out of the tight shoe, and then you think that it's like, okay, that's liberating.
Well, how did you get into the tight shoe? You were attracted by its model,
Yeah,
but they don't have your size.
exactly.
Right?
Yeah,
So you choose to take the one that
one
you
size
like,
less.
even though it's not your size, right? So it only causes suffering.
Yes.
When you take off that tight shoe, you say, now I feel good. It's all artificial. And this feel good thing it's artificial. It's not permanent. So therefore, we should really want to have a spiritual body and go back to the spiritual world that solves the problem. And if we don't try to do that, then we're caught in a cycle. The spiritual world is not all these cycles. That you have eternal life. That means you're not in a cyclic mode of changing bodies. You have an eternal body. But in the material world, everything is cyclic. You're born, you're a little baby, and you become a teenager, and you become a mature person, and you become an old man, and you die. It's a cycle. And then you take birth again. So we can't really be peaceful in the cycle like that. But when you're completely dedicated to Krishna, and you remember Krishna's moment of death, you go back to the spiritual world, you're not in the cycle anymore. You have eternal life.
The residence of four Kumaras is Guru Maharaj is Vaikuntha or Brahma Jyoti.
Where the Kumaras are,
Hmm.
why do you think they're not in the spiritual world?
We know they are in the spiritual world, but are they in the we also know they're not in the Vaikuntha, right? Because they go to Vaikuntha, and we also know they are not in the material world.
Yes, okay.
And typically, are they in the Brahman residence?
No, the four Kumaras became devotees by smelling the lotus feet of the Lord.
So
They became liberated like that by that.
we can say, right, Kumara's residence is Vaikuntha.
Yeah,
Fair to say.
they went to the door of Vaikuntha, right?
Yeah, Vaikuntha.
And but they were able to see Krishna. They made a mistake. Let's put it like that. They made a mistake, and they were going to be cursed to stay in the material world. But then Krishna comes and they were able to smell the fragrance of his lotus feet. And that way they became liberated. Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yeah.
Two questions are completely not connected. First one, Krishna, when we see in Goloka Vrindavan, you see Goloka Vrindavan, yes. Sorry, Bhulaka Vrindavan. You see from a baby, you see him growing up to the 16-year-old, and then he stays like that. In the spiritual world, do you see Krishna from the baby growing up? Because there you have an eternal body. Or does Krishna always look like the 16-year-old there and there's no baby stage?
No, there is. Well, the Yasoda, right? She's chasing after Krishna, has been very, let's say, naughty by breaking the butter pots and giving butter to the monkeys and eating butter. And she chases after him, and he's afraid, right? So he's a little boy. And so there are different periods of Krishna's pastimes. In pastimes as a baby, pastimes as a young boy, pastimes as a young man. It all depends on how you want to be related to the Lord.
So all of them are always happening.
Yeah. This is,
It's so
because
hard.
from material world, it's hard to understand but
Because
simultaneously.
time is linear here, right?
Hmm.
And there is, and everything is not, let's say, limited in the spiritual world.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to go from one type of relationship to Krishna to another, you can. They never get bored, let's put it like that. They never get bored in the spiritual world. Whereas in the material world, people get bored very easily. Yes.
The second question I had, Maharaj, this thought I had, I wanted to understand is, so in the spiritual world, if you get envious of Krishna,
If you get one,
envious,
yes,
that is when you fall down.
immediately.
You fall down.
Yeah.
So let's say if you've done one mistake of becoming envious of Krishna, like even Kumaras have done a mistake. For that, if you fall down and take 8 million births, that is a very harsh punishment for one mistake, Maharaj. Why does God do that?
Well, no. The harshness would be if you were annihilated, not existent anymore. But you have an eternal soul. So God is not actually mean, but he puts you in different positions so that you become purified and you don't make that mistake again. Right? It's just like a father, right? Father's going to punish his son who, playing with matches and trying to set fire to the house. Right? Just like Omar, he set fire to a house I had. Burned the whole
His
house
grandson.
down,
Okay.
playing with matches.
Oh,
Fortunately, he didn't die, and we eventually we had another house, right? But see, you don't really die as a human being. You just change your body. So Krishna is giving you many, many chances to go back to Godhead where you have an eternal body. So we should use the human body for what it's actually meant to be. It's the body from which you can become liberated from the cycle of birth and death. That's the whole purpose of the human body. The dog body cannot do it. The worm body cannot do it, but the human body can. So we should understand what it means to have a human body. And what is the purpose of the human body? It's to be liberated from the cycle of birth and death. Going back to the spiritual world and the spiritual body. Now in the spiritual world, there are trees, there are birds, there are bees, there are all kinds of different bodies in the spiritual world also, but they're eternal bodies. And if someone is a bee in the spiritual world, they're not disturbed by that
Mm.
because they're going to be they're going to be in touch with Krishna.
Krishna. Mm.
So, somebody might be a blade of grass in the spiritual world, but always in anticipation, Krishna will come by and step on them.
Mm.
So it's different in the spiritual world where everything is eternal. And there is progression in the spiritual world also. If you're a blade of grass and completely satisfied, okay. But if you say, well, I would like to advance, that's okay also.
Mm.
So the spiritual world is not static, it is dynamic.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. You can change your relationship with Krishna. We have to, carefully read the Shastra and get our inspiration. That's why in this verse it says, no one is dear to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nor is anyone his enemy or friend. But he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him and destroys those who have. Well, when it says destroys, they stay in a cycle of birth and death. But he gives inspiration to those who have not forgotten him. So we should be one of those people who have not forgotten Krishna. That's why we're reading Bhagavatam every day, discussing it, and staying connected to Krishna on a daily basis. I had a friend of mine who was a devotee, but then he quit Krishna consciousness. So I met him and I said, well, are you chanting? He said, yeah, of course I'm chanting. He says, I chant once a year on New Year's Eve. But that one time that I chant is worth much more than your chanting every day. You're just going mechanically. But when that one time, New Year's Eve, when I chant, it's worth more than all your chanting. Now look, did Prabhupada ever say we should only chant once on New Year's Eve? No. So what he's saying is nonsense. Right? But he actually said that to me. And I just told him that's not what Prabhupada told us to do. Chant once on New Year's Eve. But that he was a very clever person, very, very clever. So clever that he cheated himself out of Krishna.
Krishna.
Haribo. All good for Shila.
Maharaj, I was also trying to connect the dots to this verse to some of the verses in Gita. And here Krishna says, I'm not friend or enemy to anyone. At the same time, he in many places says, Surda Bhutana means friend. Even to Arjuna, you're my devotee, you're my friend. And then I'm trying to connect the dots. And then from what I'm seeing right now is Krishna. I think when these verses are referring to Vishnu. As a Vishnu, he is a destroyer of the material worlds, a maintainer and destroyer also. Because in Bhagavad also, when Krishna takes a form of time, he's a destroyer.
Yes.
But when he is a Krishna, then he's a loving person. So you can say like a president at
Being
home.
killed by Krishna is also, or being killed by Vishnu is also liberating.
Yeah. So the way we have to bring all this together is like, if we think like this, Krishna at home and Krishna at work as a president, let's say, then right, as a president, even the children is equal the rest of the citizens.
Yeah.
Even the children are subject to the rules of the
ordinary
state.
people.
But at home, then you can take time, more, help in a right way. They can understand these verses that Guru Maharaj. Right here, Kapila Muni is describing as a Vishnu and Paramatma side by side. So I was trying to see if it makes sense or not.
He's what? He's saying what?
In this one, he initially described Paramatma, and then in the previous verse he said it refers to Vishnu. So he's referring Krishna is at work now.
I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Okay, the main thing here. Anyone who revives his consciousness of the original relationship receives inspiration from Lord Krishna.
Yeah.
Okay. This does not mean that the Lord is someone's enemy or someone's friend. He helps everyone. One who is not bewildered by the influence of material energy is saved, and one who is bewildered is destroyed. It is said, therefore, no one can be saved from the repetition of birth and death without the help of the Supreme Lord. It is therefore the duty of all living entities to take shelter of the lotus feet of Vishnu and thus save themselves from the cycle of birth and death.
Yeah. So when we refer destroyer, so at least refer to the
You're
Vishnu
in the cycle of birth.
Kala.
You're
and
not
Kala is the
destroyed.
destroyer.
You're not destroyed.
Yeah.
Where you're in this cycle.
Yeah, that's what it means.
So we want to become free of this cycle of birth and death.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Zoom is talking.
Everything is cyclic in the material.
Yes.
Zoom is